what I want to do is talk about some of these visions. I put out a thing the other day and I said to people, send me your vision of what you think the world will look like, or what your vision of the future is. So yeah. Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
And a lot of people sent me little things, little visions of the future they have, because we don't want the vision that they've got. Their vision is this complete smart takeover. Even in Australia, that's what they're talking about with the floods now, the fact that they've flooded everybody out, which is complete weather wars, folks. The whole thing is weather wars. I've shown you so many times that Australian company, Acquiesce, that says they can control the weather. And they do it electromagnetically. They've said they do it electromagnetically. There's a whole bunch of disinformation out there about weather control as well and geoengineering. There's a whole bunch of distraction that is out there hiding the real story of what's going on with the weather. I mean, all the weather's controlled, folks. All of it is controlled right across the earth. And it's been controlled for over 100 years. There was a really good YouTube channel, it's actually still there I think, called Weather War 101. It was run by a woman who is a networker. She helped put the internet together basically. I mean, she was working out computer networks and routing problems and stuff when it was in its infancy. There was no path to follow. She's one of the people who created the paths that people follow now. So it was completely trailblazing stuff. Very, very intelligent woman. And then one day she started paying her attention to the weather. She started looking, she saw something on TV. She saw a weather map, a weather report, and she saw definitive overlapping circles in the weather map. And she thought, why isn't the weatherman noticing this? And then the more she looked at weather maps, the more she saw these sorts of things. And so she stopped doing what she was doing. She started concentrating on the weather, and she figured out that all the weather is controlled.
For me, it started 20 years ago. I had already been aware of the increase in bizarre and inexplicable weather events for some time, but just like everybody else, I didn't have any idea how it was happening. It was perfectly clear to me that it wasn't natural, however, and it really began to get me. One day I was watching the news and the weather report came on. The weather radar showed 2 overlapping rings plain as day, and when the storm system passed the intersecting rings, the storm completely changed. The weatherman just acted like he couldn't see it, and it was just infuriating. It was at that point I decided I wanted to know what I was looking at. Up until that point, I had spent my adult life as a corporate network engineer, and I was extremely good at it. For decades, I designed and built wide area networks for corporations all over the country and was highly sought after. Engineering and scientific thinking in general is in my blood, and from the time I was a child, knowing how things worked was my imperative. It didn't matter what the object was. If I didn't understand how something functioned, I made sure I figured it out. This inherent ability was essential throughout my career, as the early days of networking were essentially the Wild West. It was all groundbreaking work, so encountering systems, reverse engineering how they put together, and figuring out how to get disparate systems to communicate with new PC networks became second nature. So after seeing those 2 rings that I didn't understand and the weatherman's frustrating obliviousness, I set my sights on the weather. Figuring out what those rings were was the first step, which began my research and understanding of the NEXRAD Doppler grid.
So what was the next thing you discovered about these rings? And are they the HAARP rings of Dutch sense?
The first thing I determined was that the rings were all overlapping, but they were all individual. It was clear that each ring had a center, and thus whatever was in the center had to be generating the ring. It's almost surprising that it took me as long as it did, since by watching TV weather radar I was already looking at the source. But eventually I came across a layout of the 156 NEXRAD Doppler weather radar stations across the country and it hit me like a flash of light. At the center of each of these rings was an X-Rad station, and the locations of the rings matched up exactly. I found all of the necessary NEXRAD specifications to prove they were capable of doing exactly what I say they are doing, and that can be visibly observed every single day. Each NEXRAD pulse is 750,000 watts. There are 156 of them across the country, and they all overlap. This is the horrendous frequency blanket we all live in.
She tried to get the information out to people, but nobody was interested, and she seems to have disappeared. The last report that I can find of her, I think, was around about 2014, possibly 2016, but I think 2014. The website, Weather War 101, is now gone. There is a WordPress replacement site that's there, run by a guy. You can see his email there. Somewhere on the site you can find his email, but it's run by a guy, it's not run by her. And I don't know what her name is. I'd be very interested to find out if this woman is still alive and how I could get in contact with her if she is, or anybody who might know her or anything of her. If you give me some information about it, because she had some compelling information. She approached a lot of people. She approached all of the people, all of the truthers in the truth community, because when she discovered this, she thought, well, this is going to blow the lid off everything. And this is really important information, and it explains how the weather is controlled, and it shows it's demonstrable. You can look at this and you can see every day. It's right there. You can see it with your own eyes. But nobody would listen to her. Everyone was following this whole concept of HAARP and everything like that. And HAARP is an interesting thing. And even the concept of climate change, it's an interesting thing. Buenos días. Buenas tardes. But even the concept of climate change, it's a really interesting thing, because man-made climate change, is it possible? What if the climate changed 100 years ago or 150 years ago and it was man-made, or something happened that did it, and since then it's been genetically engineered in order to cover up that fact? And as it gets worse and worse, and it's getting worse and worse because the very technology they use to destroy the climate is the same technology they're using in an attempt to allegedly fix the climate, but it gives them the opportunity to blame us for the gradual breakdown of the ecosystem on this earth. And it is breaking down, folks. I mean, we're in a pretty dangerous state. Rivers are drying up, places are drying up. I mean, hot and cold. I mean, the climate is changing, but it's changing because it's being geoengineered. And it's been geoengineered right across the earth. And the way they're doing it is through Doppler radar stations and power stations. Power stations produce an enormous amount of steam and smoke, and you can see these things literally producing cloud banks.
The next thing I need to understand was how these storms just burst into existence from nowhere on a daily basis. Every single day on radar, you can see sudden explosions of storms and otherwise completely dry air. Obviously, this wasn't a natural occurrence either, and I had to find a source. These bursts were just water vapor, but since they happen all across the country in various intervals, it was very difficult to grasp what could possibly be the common source. The co-opted truth community was pushing misdirection like chem bombs to explain these bursts, without any evidence of any kind, of course, but that made no sense at all. After considerable searching, I had an epiphany. There was one in-place, on-the-ground source that could produce massive amounts of water vapor. That source was the power plant grid. I dug up some power plant overlays showing the locations of all 7,000 power plants in this country, compared them to the locations of the bursts in numerous storms, and it was like another flash of light.
So to clarify, what you see has nothing to do with HAARP whatsoever and everything to do with NEXRAD?
Yes, that's exactly right. Every single day I can prove massive NEXRAD frequency manipulation that is visibly responsible for spinning up all severe storm systems in this country. Alternatively, neither I nor anyone else can prove that HAARP is doing anything at all. Pointing at an anomaly and declaring it caused by HAARP is not proof, but that is all any HAARP videos consist of. Yet, if you approach any of the geoengineering pseudo-truthers with this evident and obvious reality, they will either go immediately silent, get argumentative, or even get hostile. There is zero evidence of HAARP versus endless daily evidence of NEXRAD, and we all see which one the truth community is being forced to focus on. There's no other way to describe this other than deliberate misdirection. But consider the scope of this influence. NEXRAD operating at 2,700 to 3,000 MHz and 750,000 watts per pulse doesn't just blanket this country. Equivalent Doppler stations blanket all other land masses and countries. Once you see with your own eyes the tremendous influence of these combined stations, it's almost impossible to imagine anything being capable of having a larger influence just based on the amount of global equipment involved alone.
Then what they do is they spray, they get drones or whatever. And I think a lot of the chemtrails are sprayed by drones. I don't think these are 747s flying around with spray cans. I mean, some of them, I'm sure they get commercial aircraft to spray as well. But a lot of them, I think, are simply drones using self-replicating nanoparticles in the tanks. You know, the drones can have solar panels, they can fly for as long as they want. They've only got to bring them down when they want to change the particles. But they produce the clouds through the power stations. I know it sounds strange, but they do. They produce the clouds through the power stations. They spray nanotech all through the clouds, which gives them the ability to steer the clouds. And then they create electromagnetic frequencies using Doppler radars, and they're able to guide them where they want them and have them react in the way they want through the electromagnetic interference applied through the Doppler radar stations.
The ridiculous disinformation propagated by controlled opposition, claiming these bursts are quote-unquote chem bombs, is entirely false. They are in fact water vapor bursts, as anyone who understands the simple process can see for themselves. There is water vapor generation in the oceans as well, most of which can be seen along the equator, but it is not nearly as widespread as it is on land. You can't very well put a power plant every dozen miles in the ocean, can you? Exactly how ocean water vapor generation is being accomplished is more elusive than on land, because there simply isn't much video or documentation of it. However, it's not difficult to imagine platforms with WSAC-like facilities, since the water supply is obviously endless. It is quite clear there are other methods of evaporating water being employed as well, but not a great deal of evidence on the subject.
Have you ever tried contacting someone not on the fringe about this, i.e. EPA, mainstream media? Hey, local Times, what are these monstrous clouds coming out of these power plants feeding into our rain systems? Have you ever brought your complaints forward officially?
Yes, of course. I've certainly tried. Pretty much every video I produce, I send to mainstream media, meteorologists, etc. Typical response is getting mocked, insulted, and dismissed as a tinfoil hat-wearing loony, even though they never actually look at the evidence. The search for an actual mainstream media journalist with eyes and a brain, or a scientist who knows what boiling water is, continues.
Now, when you think about HAARP, we're told HAARP does all this weather stuff. HAARP caused the storm here, and it caused the storm there, and it caused the tornado. People will find some radar anomaly, and they'll say, oh, that's HAARP. Well, it could be, but you need to demonstrate how HAARP actually did that. It could just be a radar anomaly. Perhaps there's something that's more demonstrable, which is the Doppler radar stations and the power stations in this power grid that's been set up right across the Earth, right across the United States, right across everywhere, and it's already there. I mean, controlling the weather through one device in Alaska is going to be extremely difficult, folks. It's actually an atmospheric heater. This whole conspiracy theory that it is HAARP controlling the weather, I would suggest, is a red herring. Again, you know, when you look at what this woman has compiled on her website on Weather War 101, there's about 60 videos there, folks. And if you go through and you watch these 60 videos, I mean, she nails it. She just shows you what's happening. And once you can see it, once you go through what she shows you on those video reports, then you can see it with pretty well every storm on Earth. If you watch the radar stations and you watch the weather reports, you can get these massive radars. You can get ones that go over Australia and over your own country. I'm sure live video, satellite video, whatever, wherever they get it from, but live video that shows you the movement of the clouds in real time. And when you see this, when you see this, you can see it happening with every single storm on Earth. That's a little bit of a telltale sign. It should be. You know, there's so much controlled opposition in the truth movement. It's ridiculous. Everything's controlled, folks. Everything's backwards. I mean, how many people were talking about real history until we discovered it just a couple of years ago? How many people talk about the truth of World War II and what really happened there? How many people talk about the Bolshevik Revolution? And when you get such a huge promotion of something like HAARP, all the weather's controlled by HAARP, but there's no demonstrable proof of that. Well, what does that do when you're trying to tell people the weather's controlled? The weather's manipulated, it's all controlled, it's all contrived, they steer it, they create the storms, they do it all themselves. Then you try to tell people, they say, well, how do they do it? And you say, well, it's this antenna array in Alaska. And they look at you and go, really? Okay. And they go back to, you know, watching the TV. But when you can show them that it's actually the Doppler radar setup, and you can actually, like I said, you can show this. I said 60 videos she's got on this website, folks. And you can go and look at it for yourself. And she puts forth an extremely compelling case for the entire weather system being destroyed 100 years ago and them doing everything they can to cover it up and to blame us for the continued degradation. And the only way to stop this is to shut down all this industry now, to shut down all the spraying, shut down these huge power stations, go back to natural energy. I mean, we're really in dire straits, folks, we really are. But I really suggest people look at that, and it might give them some insight into just how deep this rabbit hole goes and how nefarious this system is and how much of a system they've got in place to control the weather. I mean, how much work they've already done. And like I said, folks, it's demonstrable. So you've got to ask the question, is the weather being controlled from this one facility in Alaska, which is an ionospheric heater, but we've never seen any demonstrable proof that it's coming from HAARP? Or is it possible that it's been created by these stations that are demonstrably there and do react and do create these overlapping circles, and all the technology is there to do it? I mean, controlling the weather is a really big, expensive, complicated procedure, folks. You don't just shoot a beam into the sky from Alaska and control the weather, you know? See, I think she's onto something, and all of these geoengineering conferences and all these talks and all this exposing of HAARP and all this shit that we've seen for the last 20 years, where the fuck has it gone? It's gone nowhere. It's gone nowhere. And here was this woman trying to put this out, and like I said, she seems to have disappeared. So again, if anybody can give me any information about this woman, or how I could get in contact with her, or even if she's still alive, I would very much appreciate it, because I'd love to talk to her and I'd love to be able to promote her work if she's still actually releasing any work, you know. I will leave it there for now. Thank you to all the people who sent me so many kind emails. Same thank yous I always give. Thank you to anybody who's ever supported me. Thank you to everybody who's speaking out and making a difference. Don't despair. We're going to get through this, folks. But like I said, you just got to be prepared for this ugliness that's going to happen in the meantime. But hey, no stake in the outcome. This is what you came here to do, and ultimately, this is the ultimate test for all of us. So, yeah, it had to come to this. It had to come to this. So don't lose faith, folks. Don't lose faith. Stay strong, stay powerful, and I'll see you on the other side. But I'll see you before then anyway. I'll be back in a few days to have another chat. Please take very good care until then. In Lakesh.
Va bene? Via.